Vietnam War veteran Max Erikson, on a trolleybus, noticed an Asian-looking girl and his thoughts drifted back to 1966, a time he'd rather forget. Sergeant Tony Miser ordered 2 privates to set up mines on the flanks. Thatcher suspected one of the enemy tunnels was right beneath them. The green recruit thought he saw an enemy and opened fire on the bushes. This alerted the squad, and mortar fire rained down on them. During the retreat, Max fell through the ground. Indeed, there was a tunnel here, used by the Vietnamese. The private called for help, but the first to hear him was an enemy soldier, already crawling with a knife to finish off the American. Finally, the sergeant saw Max stuck in the ground and managed to save him just in time. They had to fend off a Vietnamese soldier perched in a tree. In the morning, the squad entered a small village. Max mentioned he'd only been there for 3 weeks. According to Brownie, by the second month, you didn't care about what was happening around you or what deeds you were doing yourself. Salaga treated the kids to chocolate. In return, they gave him fruit. The sergeant advised against eating anything the locals gave. The kid justified himself by saying he took the food out of politeness. This caused laughter and outrage among the older comrades as they were burning their villages. They laughed at Max and said he could apologize to the villagers. The soldiers tried to find out if there were any enemies in the village, as there were only women and old people around. Salaga went to learn how to use the local gardening equipment. Brownie advised him not to mess around and stick with the squad if he wanted to return to his wife and child. Brownie reasoned that they were close to being demobbed, but then he was hit by a burst of gunfire. The shelling came from the bushes across the river. At the same time, a peasant threw a grenade at the Americans from behind, and Max miraculously hit it with an underbarrel grenade launcher. Brownie lost a lot of blood due to a neck wound. A helicopter immediately flew in for the soldier. Brownie was the sergeant's old combat buddy, and he struggled not to cry. The squad returned to the military base. The soldiers drank beer and relaxed. Only the sergeant remained serious and tense. He cheered up his subordinates with the news that they would go on reconnaissance tomorrow. Corporal Clark said he hated this country. He'd like to blow it up. Salaga, after Brownie's death, no longer felt like fighting. Anyway, they were constantly retreating. In the evening, the squad wanted to go to town to have some fun and pick up girls at the brothel, but they were turned back at the checkpoint. Today, for some reason, they couldn't go to town. The guys returned to the barracks and got drunk. The sergeant introduced them to a private Diaz who would replace Brownie. Tomorrow, they set out at dawn. They needed to find bunkers and tunnels not marked on the map, and they would leave an hour earlier to find some girls in the nearby village for entertainment and morale boosting. Max couldn't believe that the sergeant was really going to kidnap a girl, especially with only a month left before demob, and he had no reason to risk it. But even before dawn, we see the squad walking through the village, peering into every hut where the locals sleep peacefully. In one of them, they found 2 sisters. Both of them were gagged, but their muffled screams still woke up the whole village. This really happened just 10 feet from Max, and he couldn't do anything about it. Moreover, the privates were placed at the house to keep the other villagers away. Judging by the soldiers' reaction, only Max was shocked by what he had just seen. One of the girls was dragged out of the hut. Her mother wanted to pass a scarf to her daughter, but the bastard, Clark, shoved it into the poor girl's mouth. Max apologized hoarsely. The girl's hands were tied, and she was forced to go with the squad. Max approached the sergeant to talk about the kidnapped girl, but he was immediately sent on patrol with Thatcher. The jerk wondered why they hadn't done this before. At a halt, Clark began to harass the captive. Diaz confessed to Max that he didn't want to do anything with the girl. Our hero also asked him not to. Suddenly, Thatcher made a noise. He thought he saw enemies in the bushes and opened fire, but it turned out to be a buffalo. The girl coughed, and the sergeant gave her an aspirin tablet. Max again asked the sergeant to explain what they were doing and what was happening here in general. Max asked not to mess with his head. She's just a peasant who was sleeping in her own house. The sergeant pressured Salaga, saying they were all comrades in arms and she was the enemy's stooge, but as for who Max was, he didn't know anymore. Private Thatcher made the girl carry his backpack. Seeing this, Clark made him carry his. The captive had to walk a long distance barefoot. The squad stopped at an abandoned hut. The sergeant decided to set up a command post here. He took 2 others with him for reconnaissance. Diaz asked Max to stand up for him if they ordered him to take the girl by force. The privates agreed to support each other. Max approached the captive to tend to the wound on her back. The poor thing looked at him as if he were a frightened animal, but then realized he wouldn't harm her. The sergeant decided to set Salaga straight. He apologized for snapping and then reminded them that they could only rely on each other. Miser brought Max to the captive and tied her hands. Salaga will do it with the girl along with the others, but the guy turned and walked away. The sergeant got angry and noticed that Max was looking at Diaz. He thought they were in it together, but Diaz got scared and said he was with everyone. The sergeant and the corporal couldn't understand Max's orientation and thought he might even sympathize with the enemy. Then some accident could happen to him, as everyone didn't care about some stooge. Max pointed his weapon at the sergeant, but he didn't even flinch. The sergeant headed for the hut. He'd be first in line. When Max flinched, Clark held a knife to his throat and sent the private to stand guard. Second, the sergeant ordered Diaz to go. The taunting continued all night. Max never once turned toward the hut. In the morning, the squad reached the river. There they found the enemy. The enemy was definitely up to something. Max and Thatcher were sent to the hut to fetch ammunition, while Diaz called for reinforcements. Clark was angry because he wanted to shoot, not watch the captive. The corporal decided to leave Max instead of himself and went to the river with Thatcher. When the guy approached to untie the exhausted Vietnamese girl, she went into hysterics and resisted. The American apologized to her. The girl is sick, she has a high fever. The captive eagerly grabbed the crackers. It never occurred to the men to feed their victim. When the sergeant saw Clark next to him, he asked if he was okay in the head, because how could he leave Max alone with the captive? The corporal had to run back. Max really decided to help the girl escape, but he couldn't go himself, otherwise he'd be recognized as a deserter. However, the Vietnamese girl clung to him, begging him to help her get to her native village, and Max agreed. The two of them were already heading towards the jungle, but then Clark caught up with them and ordered the private to go to the sergeant. The whole squad is lying in ambush, waiting for the moment to attack the enemy. The girl keeps coughing. Clark covers her mouth with his hand and suggests the sergeant kill her so she doesn't give away their position. Miser orders Max to kill the captive. At the very last moment, Max fires into the air, so there's no reason to kill the girl. A shootout ensues. Max was left to cover the squad, and the others ran down the road. There was no one left to protect the girl. While Max looked through the scope of his rifle, Clark struck her several times in the abdomen with his huge knife. To help the Americans, a gunboat arrived, and the sergeant realized it was time to retreat. The badly wounded girl, covered in blood, got up and staggered down the road. She no longer understands what's going on around her and just walks somewhere ahead. The sergeant was surprised to see her in front of him. Miser shouts that the girl is escaping and hits Max in the stomach with the butt of his gun. The poor girl was shot from 4 pistols and fell from the embankment. Just then, combat helicopters arrived and blew everything around. The Vietnamese boat exploded, causing the gunboat to capsize. The bodies of the Americans floated in the water, not far from the girl's corpse lying on the rocks by the shore. Max woke up high in the sky. He was being evacuated by helicopter. Next time, he regained consciousness in the hospital amidst the screams of severely wounded soldiers. Back at the base, he immediately found his comrade Rowan and told him that they had indeed done it to the poor girl. Clark immediately ran up to Max and interrupted him. The guy worries that he might now be eliminated as a witness, so it's necessary to inform Lieutenant Riley about what happened as soon as possible. However, in response to Max's story, he told his own. When his wife was giving birth, they wouldn't let her into the room because of her race. The woman gave birth right in the emergency room, and he was thrown behind bars because he caused chaos in the hospital and intended to kill a doctor. He was kept in prison just long enough for his head to clear. All he wanted was to return to his wife and child. That's when he realized what had happened. There was no point in going against the system. The lieutenant will just break up the platoon and send them to 5 different places, and Max needs to relax and forget about everything. Max convinces himself that he couldn't have done anything. He couldn't have shot Clark back then. Around him and Rowan, Private Cherry is completely helpless. The guy lost his platoon and now doesn't know where to turn. The kid clearly ended up in the war by accident. Suddenly, there was an explosion. Everyone fell. Someone stepped on a mine. This lucky guy turned out to be Private Cherry. No one was even surprised. He was doomed from the first minutes. Max doesn't like that the death of the guy is just a reason for jokes. The closeness of death frees their hands, and they can do whatever they want. Max decided to break ranks and went to Captain Hill, bypassing the lieutenant, but Riley had already told him everything. The captain clarified whether the private understood that his actions could provoke an international scandal. It's already too late to help the poor girl. The private must understand that the court is very lenient. Even if they're convicted, no one will throw them behind bars. Later, they'll want revenge, but Max has a wife and child. The captain finally dropped the facade and stated that Miser actually saved his life. He got a bit carried away with the girl, but the guy is still a child. The sergeant is only 20 years old. In the evening, someone was following Max and was about to toss a grenade at him in the toilet. It turned out to be Corporal Clark. Drunk Thatcher accidentally snitched on him, dropping his lighter. Max saw the grenade on the floor and managed to jump out of the room at the very last moment. Shaking himself off, he grabbed a shovel, went into the barracks, and swung it at Clark's head with all his might, then told Miser that nobody cares. He told everyone what had happened, but no one cares about it, so he doesn't have to try to kill him. In the bar, a stranger sat down next to drunk Max. Apparently, the private has some problems if he's holding a gun right in front of himself. The man is a priest and offered Max to confess. The guy told about what the squad did to the poor girl from the village, and the priest helped bring this incident to light. Soon, the girl's body was found. Clark, with a dent in his forehead from the shovel, denies his guilt. People like him and Miser should be on the battlefield, not here. Dim-witted Thatcher decided that Max refused to participate in the crime only because he's not as experienced as the other soldiers. Diaz admits that he did it because he was afraid of being ridiculed. Miser, on the other hand, tried to justify himself by saying that he helped other Vietnamese, by the way, including a child to whom he even gave artificial respiration. Private Diaz was sentenced to 8 years of hard labor, Private Thatcher was sentenced to 15 years of hard labor, Corporal Clark was sentenced to life imprisonment in a strict regime colony, Sergeant Miser was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. When the criminals passed by Max, he remembered the captain's words about revenge, and at that moment, he woke up on the trolleybus. That girl got off, forgetting her handkerchief. Max returned the forgotten item to the stranger and admitted that she reminded him of someone from a terrible dream. He hopes this nightmare is finally over.